Excellent. So you've come a long way. You've now got a fairly good idea, hopefully, how the Xcode interface all works. You've created an app which has a number of different interface elements on it, and some of those elements interact with each other in that this label is updated whenever you press the button. So that's most of our introduction complete, but I wanted to finish this section by actually creating something which might be vaguely useful. So as real an app as we can make given the limited coding knowledge that we have so far. And the app that I've come up with is a very simple heads or tails app. It's a problem that we have in society that we don't carry coins around anymore, so that makes it very hard to make a random decision, which is 50-50 either way. So something like an Apple Watch is an ideal substitute for that. So what we're going to do is very simply create an app which has a button that whenever you press it either says heads or tails. Now usually I would set you off on a challenge to create this app, but we haven't actually covered most of the language that's required to do it. So really I'm doing this app now out of interest for you so that you can see how it all fits together, and that when we then go on and learn the if statements and the loops and all of the aspects of Swift, then it's a bit more interesting for you because you can see where it came from. If, however, you do know a little bit of Swift, you should actually be able to create this app given the knowledge that we've covered already. So I'll leave it up to you to decide whether you're going to try and do the app yourself, but either way, you're very welcome to follow along with me as I make it here. Okay, so I'm going to start by getting rid of the elements that we don't need. So I'm just going to click on the switch and press delete, and similarly click on the slider and get rid of that as well. I'm going to change the layout very slightly because I don't like that being top left. So let's change the label so that it's centered both ways. And I'm also going to get rid of the text so that the label doesn't actually show anything until the user has pressed the button, and then heads or tails will be displayed. So quick question for you, where are we going to run our code which will decide whether it was heads or tails? The answer, I hope you got it, is in this chunk of code here, because remember this chunk of code is what is run when the button is pressed. So fortunately we don't need to change that much because we've already referred to our label as name label, so I don't need to add in any extra IB outlets or IB actions. I have everything that I need. All I need to do is put a bit of code in here that will decide randomly whether we've got a head or a tail. And again, I wouldn't expect you to know what that code is, but you should be able to follow along and see what happens. So the first thing we're going to do is create a variable which will store our random number. To create a variable in Swift, you use the command var, and then we'll create a random number. So this is the name of our variable, and this is going to store a number which is either going to be 0 or 1 randomly. And then we're going to set that equal to, and we're going to use a function called arc for random uniform. So make sure you've got that one selected and then press enter to auto predict it. And then what we need to do is put the number 2 into the brackets. And what that essentially does is chooses a random number from 0 up to, but not including, the number here. So this will choose a random number between 0 and 1. So for example, what number would you put in here if you wanted a random number between 0 and 6? The answer is 7, because you always get a random number from 0 to 1 less than whatever you put here. So let's put our 2 back in. And another mini challenge for you. Let's make it so that every time we press the button, it actually just displays this number in the logs. See if you can figure out how to do that, similar to an instruction that we've used already. I hope you managed that. The way I'm going to do it is println, but instead of printing my app is working, we're going to print random number. So what that will do is just display the value of our random number variable in the logs every time we press the button. Now I don't really want to update this every time we press the button, so I'm going to comment out this line of code, which I do by putting 2 slashes. You can see we've already got some comments that were there by default. Anything with a double slash in front of it will be a comment. So this isn't really a comment, but running it with the double slash in front just means that this line of code won't be executed. So what this should do is when we run the app, every time I press the button, it should give me either a 0 or a 1 in the logs. So let's just check that and make sure that our app is displaying what we think it should. And this is a general technique that really every time you add a few lines of code, it's worth running the app just to make sure that everything's running as expected. What you should try and avoid is writing loads and loads of code and then running the app, because almost certainly it won't work, and then you'll have to spend a lot of time working through your code finding out where the errors are. So here we go. Let's move this out of the way so we can see the logs, and then we press our button. And you can see we've got a 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, etc. Fantastic. So that's looking good. It's looking pretty random. Excellent. So now we need to change our code. So obviously we don't actually want it to print this to the logs every time. We need to do a check to see what random number was, so what our random number turned out to be. And then let's say if it was a 0, we'll set the name label to heads, and if it wasn't, we'll set it to tails. And then we'll have an app that does what we were aiming for. So to do that in Swift, we use a command called if, and then we want to check if random number is equal to 0. Notice that I've put 2 equal signs there. If I only have 1 equal sign, it'll give us an error, because 1 equal sign is used when you want to set something to a certain value. So if I wanted to set the random number variable equal to 0, then I would do that. But that's not what I want to do. I want to test whether or not the random number variable is equal to 0. So I use if random number and then double equal sign and then 0. And I want to contain my code somehow that I want to execute if this statement is true. How do you think we do that? Hopefully you guessed curly brackets. So you just do 1 curly bracket and the other one is automatically created for you. So now can you put a bit of code in there which will update the name label to have a value of heads? I hope you managed it. All you needed to do was copy this bit of code, pop it in there, and of course instead of my app is working, we want to change to heads. So far we've got a half working app which will pick heads half of the time, but we haven't got the option for tails. So to do that, we use the command else. And we pop it there, and then we use our curly brackets again. So hopefully this makes sense what's going on. If the random number is equal to 0, then we're going to do this. Else, i.e. if it's not, we're going to do something else. So again, very quick challenge for you. Can you make it so that it chooses tails if the random number is not 0? I hope you managed it. It's pretty easy. We'll just copy and namelabel.setText, and of course what we want this time is tails. And to keep everything nice and tidy, I'll get rid of my comment there because I don't need it. So let's just take a quick moment to see what's happening here. This chunk of code is running whenever we press the button, because that's the IB action that we created in the previous video. And then we're creating a random number variable which is equal to either 0 or 1, depending on the output of this random number generating function. If the number is equal to 0, then we set the label to heads. If it's not, we set it to tails. So that's exactly the effect that we wanted to have. And with any luck, this will give us a working app that we could use as a simulation of tossing a coin. So here we go. Let's have a look. There we go. We've got a tails, heads, tails, heads, heads again, tails, etc. Fantastic. So I hope you managed to do most of those mini challenges on your own. Definitely, as you work through the course, try and do as much as you can on your own. You'll learn so much more that way than you will from following along from what I'm doing. But overall, congratulations, you've reached the end of the first real section of the course, which means that you now know how Xcode all fits together. You can create a number of different user interface elements, and you can write code which controls those user interface elements, and you hopefully manage to understand at least how to make an app that simulates the effect of tossing a coin and gives you a random heads or tails. I hope you've enjoyed this first section, and let's now go on to look into Swift in a bit more detail, which will of course allow us to create much more advanced apps than just ones that do heads or tails.